Welcome to the OC Politics Show, keeping politics bipartisan, local, and on the level.
Welcome to the OC Politics Show, and I'm Todd DeVoe.
I'm Joe Matthews.
And we're going to talk a little bit about cultural appropriation, statues coming down, maybe it's a little bit of the cancel culture, and we're going to be discussing the culture battle, what belongs in our public spaces, and are these political opportunists, or is it the public voicing their opinion and position to take statues down? And Joe, should we take them all down or what?
If it solves our problems. You take them all down, you have 20 million more problems, right?
Probably, yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely.
People love their statues.
So, what's going on here in the news? Let's talk about Stonewall goes down in Virginia.
Disneyland self-polices themselves. Good riddance to the tar baby.
The Duke might get the heave-ho.
Teddy Roosevelt not immune to being judged and removed.
So, Joe, let's talk about John Wayne here for a little bit. And I'm really disappointed in our elected officials, to be honest with you. We have your Joseph, your state senator, right, wrote this op-ed piece in the Orange County Register talking about how John Wayne needs to be removed. Nobody knows who he is. He's irrelevant. And, if you look him up, he's a self-proclaimed white supremacist. He said some really nasty things back in the day. He was, for all intents and purposes, John Wayne was an alcoholic and a jerk as a person, right? That's just everything you've read.
And he was very tall, too.
He was tall. That's true.
Tall man. He was very tall.
And he had a cannon at his house, and he would blow it every day at sunset or whatever, or when the flag go down. Could you imagine being his
neighbor? Well, if he knew it was coming.
Oh, that's true. Oh, here comes the sunset. Turn the TVs down or up or whatever. So there's that, and he made this. He stated his argument, right? And as he goes through his argument and states how freaking bad John Wayne is, and talks about like all these people in his district that we could name the airport after, war heroes from World War II, a guy who was in the Korean War, who was a Holocaust survivor, all these people, even the newest, the Navy SEAL, one of the first Navy SEALs who died, or I think the first Navy SEAL who died in combat during the new war on terror in Afghanistan and Iraq. Name them after these people. And we asked him to come on the show. Nothing. Crickets. Reached out to his press secretary. Nothing. Crickets. Why wouldn't your elected official, Joe, why won't he come on the show?
I don't know. I didn't vote for that guy. That's for sure. And we reached out several ways to the party, right, to get their input, because it was their press release really that got this kind of firestorm going for this particular issue. It all started off with the Democratic Party saying, hey, we don't like the statue based on the other statue situations going on in the country. They kind of jumped on the bandwagon, and now they're not around to kind of back it up. So it's a sad state of affairs.
Well, it's the Democratic Party of Orange County. They are the ones that put it on their platform. They're the ones that are pushing it. And
let's be clear. We are not, pro-Democratic Party. We are not pro-Republican Party. We're not pro-Libertarian Party. We're just trying to get the story straight. We just want to make sure we get the right person commenting about the story so we can educate the public, which is our first real priority in this show, is to educate the public. And I just want to say that real quick. So it doesn't sound like we're just, it's time to bash the Democratic Party.
Right. The only reason, and the only reason why that I'm sounds like I'm bashing them, if you will, is that they put the letter out.
They deserve the bash. This time they deserve the bash.
Tom Unberg is the name of your senator, by the way.
Yes.
And What was that?
A very respected man.
Yeah, well, and nothing. He didn't even. You know what? I mean, like even if the guy says I don't want to be on your show for whatever particular reason, right? Just at least send a statement, but nothing. They have no statement about this. So everything that we're going to say here about the statue coming down at the John Wayne Airport is pretty much just a conversation about statues in general. You know. So what do you think of that? I mean, I think. And our last guest that we had on the show, who's the vice president candidate for the Libertarian Party, Spike Cohen, stated that on his opinion on statues, and I think I'm going to subscribe to this, to be honest with you, is that if it's on private land, such as Disney, right? Because we're going to talk about Disney here later, such as Disney or the mall or in front of your house for that matter, if you want to put a statue up to whatever and you're spending your money on it and you're maintaining it with your money, that is what it is. Or make the statues private parks and have people, in which there are private parks. New York City has a few of them, and have people maintain those. Have people maintain those statues. And I think the issue comes in the point, and Joe, we can talk about this in a minute here, is that private money came in to fund most of these statues that were put up, right? You go back and take a look at most of the memorials that have been put up, even like the Washington monuments. A lot of the memorials in Washington, D.C. still to this day are on public land, but they're privately funded memorials, right? However, the maintenance of those memorials are being paid for by taxpayers' dollars. And so the argument here is we should not be using taxpayer money to maintain monuments. And I think what Tom Umberg states in his piece is true, where he says that what we put up, what statues are being paid for by the public dime, are things that our culture memorializes, our culture is supportive of, I suppose, right? So that's being said, Joe, what do you think? How should we handle the statue situation? Should we stick with the cancel culture and tear down statues?
I think in 20 years we'll be taking down somebody else's statue for some reason that offended everybody. I mean, when you think about John Wayne, that statue went up in 1979. 4 out of 5 people were white, and no big deal, no big whoop. But now you have a different culture, you have a different electorate that's out there, and they're waving their hand. That's what I'm saying. It's a cyclical thing. These statues are going to go up and they're going to come down based on who's around and what's the beef of the day.
Right. And to be fair, with the John Wayne statue, or with John Wayne in general, he did fund a lot of things in Orange County. He paid for the first helicopter the Orange County Sheriff's Department got. He paid for a lot of things around Orange County that got, that needed some funding, or at least some political backing specifically to fund things, fundraisers and whatnot. So, I mean, he, outside of some of the stuff, his flaws that he has, he did give back to the community. So naming the airport after him was one of those things of saying, hey, he's giving back to the community. It's time to give back to him. Now, again, was it right, wrong, or indifferent at this point? That's to be heard. But statues are in general.
It was Twitter worthy of Trump. He actually said that it was incredibly stupid, and the Republicans got on board with their press release saying that they were against the removal of the statue, which makes it now a bipartisan issue.
Partisan issue for
partisan,
sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. I want to read some of this piece here from J.D. Tuxell from Reason Magazine. And it's really interesting. And his argument is all statues should be private. And he writes, it's difficult to invoke much concern of the removal of statues of slavery advocates from public property. But the historical revisionism, gosh, again, I knew I was going to kill this part. Revisionism. How do I say that? Anyway, has to stop there. Of course, as removals are developed by the policy debate, and mob activity. They've engulfed moral, sketchy politicians, debatable public figures, and people about whom the mob have serious misconceptions, right? So that's how he starts this our thing. And I'm not going to go read the entire thing, right? But he's basically stating, hey, this is politics. People are looking at statues, some of the for good reasons in some cases, right? We have the Confederate soldiers, or not soldiers, but the Confederate generals that have been placed around the Confederacy, the Old South, if you will. It didn't happen until the late night or the 19 teens, like the 1919, about there around that time, about the time of World War One.
Jim Crow laws.
Jim Crow laws, for sure. And then the other thing too, what started this too, is what was happening during that time, Joe. What was happening when all these statues started popping up?
Well, there was a re-emergence of the KKK at the time.
This is true. And then I'm going to go back to the question, why? I'm going to poke your history brain right now, Joe.
I'm sorry, it's too early, and that's a C+ for me.
We started having another influx of immigration.
That's it. Yeah, I was just going to say.
Right.
And, we wanted to mount these monuments to let people know who was in charge.
And one of the things too they have to remember about the KKK, right? Not only were they anti-black, they were anti-Catholic as well.
Anti-immigrant.
Yeah. Right. And so a lot of these, and the interesting thing is a lot of these laws that were passed during this time, specifically with the big separation of church and state, and I'm putting that up there, was not necessarily because the South necessarily had an issue with having prayer in school, if you will. What they had an issue with was supporting the Catholic churches schools. And so they didn't want to see money and things like that going to the Catholic Church. So there's some interesting historical things that are happening during this time period, right? During the 1910 to the 1920s, we're in war. You have the election of Woodrow Wilson, right? And why was that an important election? Because that was the first time we had a president from the South being brought into the White House since the Civil War, right? And then so he comes up, he shows the Birth of the Nation, screens it in the White House, right? Which is crazy. And then during that screening, you start seeing the resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan, which is interesting because there was a huge resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan in Southern California. And I'm going to tell you, do you know what city where the biggest Klan members were in?
Next to Disneyland, maybe?
No. It's kind of weird.
I thought Anaheim. I thought Anaheim was the big.
Downey, actually. But probably Anaheim for Orange County. So, yeah. Here, so we're going through this. And the reason...
Speaking of Woodrow Wilson class of 88 is going to get... They're talking about renaming that high school because of that very issue. So
absolutely,
it's going around.
And the reason why I bring up this history lesson, if you will, is because there's understanding what was happening during that time when the statues started getting erected, right? It wasn't that these were put up by maybe some of them were relatives of the people of the South. But it wasn't that it was put up after the Confederacy failed. It was put up during the time that we were not far. I guess people are still alive that fought in the war, but we were not. It wasn't like it was built in like the 1890s or something like this. This is later on, but with private money, people did fundraisers to put these statues up, right? And it was funded by private funds. But the reason behind it wasn't necessarily to glorify to celebrate the general necessarily. I think the reason why they put this up was to say to the new Americans coming here and to the immigrants and to those saying, no, the South is still here and we're still bitter about this war, and kind of like an FU to the North. That's my opinion. What do you think, Joe?
Well, if you looked at Monument Avenue in Richmond, Virginia. It is imposing. It is huge. I mean, you had Stonewall Jackson on one side and Robert E. Lee on the other, but it is like going down, a street of mass monuments of huge proportion. It's just an incredible thing to see. And now one of them is gone. Boom, just like that.
Well, I could see Robert E. Lee coming down as well. They're
facing lawsuits. I guess that's keeping it from not being knocked down because he was a nice guy. I don't know. He did more. I don't know. I mean, he won some stuff. Yeah. What makes Robert E. Lee any better than Stonewall Jackson?
I don't know. It's a good question. Well, here's an interesting thing. The mayor, who is LeVar Stoney, which is kind of a interesting fact that he's the one that's removing Stonewall Jackson.
Historical footnote.
So Stoney's taking Stonewall down.
With emergency powers.
Emergency powers. The city council was going to take a vote to it, and he said, "No, I'm using emergency powers and taking this thing down."
And it was done instantly. Like within a day, it went down. That's some power.
That is a power. Yeah,
that mayor knew what he was doing.
I get to see. I'm interested about this part though. When they take the monuments down, and historically speaking, by the way, everybody, that when we start talking about ripping of monuments down, this is something that's gone through the ages, if you will, of people, right? I mean, if you take a look at even during our Revolutionary War, right, we had the Sons of Liberty would go out and they tore down statues to the king. I mean, they did some vandalism as well, throwing the tea over the if you will, the Boston Tea Party. They would go and mark with a big T for Tory, for Tories or for the king, right? They would mark T's over businesses and stuff to avoid doing business with people who are doing business with the king. So the idea of this cancel culture, if you will, it goes back, to the time of the Revolutionary War.
What about? I was just going to say, what about Desert Storm? That iconic, picture of Saddam Hussein's statue being toppled over as kind of a symbol of the end of the regime.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's like, I mean, if you take a look at that, you take a look what happened over when the Berlin Wall fell. Right now throughout the old Soviet Union, statues of Lenin and Stalin and the other Soviets are being torn down as we speak. Take a look at those things right there. So like you said before, Joe, statues get erected and statues get torn down, just depending on the mood of the people, right? But the symbolism of the statues coming down, and this is what I was about to say, is that when you see people ripping statues down, there's the mob rule, if you will, ripping statues down. It could be unsettling, right? And these statues are destroyed.
Well, we had that mob rule in Jackson when they tried to take down Jackson right in front of the president's house, and what the president sent 400 National Guardsmen to protect the Jackson Monument from being taken down. Andrew Jackson, the president,
former president of the United States, right?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, but when we start, so let's talk about this for a second. Then we start talking about statues. This is my contention on it, and I wasn't joking when I said let's take them all down, because if we're going to pay for them, we should be very selective of who we have up there. I mean, there's a statue of John Greenleaf Whittier at Central Park where I was a commissioner on that park, and that got vandalized. And what I think is interesting, that guy was was a big anti-slaver, wrote pieces, did a whole bunch of stuff, actually helped get people. He was part of the Underground Railroad, getting slaves out of the South into free areas.
Yeah, but if I don't know it, I would just think he was a famous white guy in Whittier, and that was it. If I didn't have the education, if I couldn't read, the placard properly that says abolition, help me, Todd.
Abolitionist.
Yeah, what exactly that means,
Yeah, Joe, you and I are having issues with words this morning. Yeah, no, and so, like I said, the reason why I said take them all down, because my contention and my issue is that when you take a look at the statues that are being targeted today, right? Whether it's the Confederates, which is a different story, but even outside of that, some of the statues that are being allowed to stand, you go, why is Senator Byrd still being touted as being this great person, right? And his statue is still in the hall statues up at the at the Capitol. Yet he was actually a member of the KKK, and not only was he a member, he was a recruiter, and then became like the Grand Wizard of West Virginia, right? But yet why is his statue not being taken down? Why is Nancy Pelosi not removing that statue? Right. And that's my question I have to ask you. What are the politics behind each removal of a statue?
I think everything has a tipping point, and people haven't brought anything attention in this situation to get Byrd removed. It's just like they're quietly sitting there doing nothing for years and years and years until someone reads a Playboy article and they find out, they're racist, and then brings out the woodwork of people being upset, and then they ask for the removal. So I don't think Byrd's gotten to that point yet. I mean, I think eventually the way this culture is evolving and the way people are systematically like looking at everybody and removing everyone that's offensive, he'll get his day in court, I guess.
They want to remove Mount Rushmore. They want,
Well, the Indians feel it's on their land. That's always been their arguing point, is that they built that monument. Indian died making it, and it shouldn't be there. It's sacred land, for sure.
That's definitely Californians, right? When everything's ended, when you say for sure, that settles it all.
That means I'm ending my sentence.
Just for sure. But I mean, and it goes back to my contention of remove them all or whatever, or don't have money, state taxpayers' money, paying for those. Mike says, in Australia, a statue museum was established dealing with the British and early founders, and they are self-funded by people and taking kids to learn their history. That's maybe a way to do it. And that's kind of what I was going back with, taking that Stonewall Jackson monument down in a systematic way instead of having it torn down. Can we take these, and this is where I was going to go with this, can we take those statues and put them in a museum instead of having them in the public space the way they are today? A privately funded museum, please.
Well, we were going to talk about this later, but Teddy Roosevelt, the museum is requesting of the city that it be removed because of its offensive nature.
Is it offensive? It's very offensive.
Why is it offensive? Well, if you looked at the statue, he's on horseback. He's looking glorious as ever. Like he's overdone. Like he's bigger than life. And then at the foot of each horse leg is a Native American and an African American. So as a kind of a symbolistic subjugation, and it looks bad. And it's been looking bad for a long, long time. And the museum actually has asked for the city to remove it because it was so offensive to people. So I don't know if it can even fit in a museum.
Well, that museum is a publicly funded museum.
I guess if you're putting out front and it's representing the museum instead of, cut down, put inside, and then a placard says this once was, up front, but this guy, Teddy Roosevelt, had a history of blah, blah, blah. And therefore, we had to move the statue here. And we hope we can learn from our mistakes. Ta-da.
Yep, Teddy Roosevelt definitely was an interesting character in the history of the United States. And he was not, again, another guy who, if you take a look at him in total, he said some things that are very not great, right? I mean, he said, one of his quotes was something along the lines of, and I'm paraphrasing this, that the only good Indian is a dead Indian. And then he says, but that's not necessarily true for all of them. He goes, but 9 out of 10. And he goes, and if the 10th one died, I wouldn't take that hard of a look at it either. And and that was like kind of his
machismo.
Yeah, and like
bravado. That was the bravado, the machismo of the time,
And then he was really instrumental in the idea of assimilation of the Native Americans. His attitude and the attitude of the time was that culture was dying anyway. Let's bring him into the city. He gave money into the idea of bringing Native Americans off reservation, if you will, put them into training positions, jobs, teaching them English, not allowing them to know the native language. So he did a lot of negative stuff, which I'm so sure at the time they probably thought it was good, but he did a lot of negative stuff for the Native Americans. So I could understand why having his big head sitting over your old lands is probably pretty not a really nice thing to see every day. And it goes back to, why are we funding this? Why are we funding any of these monuments with taxpayer money?
I agree. Teddy Roosevelt, just to talk about what he's done that was good, he created the National Park Service. He was a great naturalist. I mean, I had to go back and check out that history because he's been a big hero of mine. I have his autobiography, and so it's sad to see them go sometimes, because you think, even John Wayne, watched John Wayne movies forever, love those movies, and now we have to say goodbye to him. So it's sad when you learn the truth about your heroes.
Yeah, no, one of my relatives actually wrote a book, his first biography, William Roscoe Thayer, and I'm a Thayer on my mom's side, wrote and actually was friends with Roosevelt. I'm from the Capital District in Albany, New York, is where I grew up, where my family's from, and so we're pretty tied in over there. And yeah, so I've actually, my family's had a good view, I suppose, if you take it that way, a positive view of Teddy Roosevelt, as growing up. But yeah, I mean, you have to take those warts with the good, or you know what I mean. And I think at the end of the day, and this is just my take on this. This is my wrap, and Joe, and I'll turn it to you, and you can say your last piece. At the end of the day, people are people, and no, I don't think that there is a person out there who's 100% an angel and good, or 100% evil and bad, right? We have flaws. We have to take a look at those flaws, and we have to see what those demons really are that are coming out. And are they bad enough to cancel people and cancel our history necessarily? We should learn from our past, right? So we don't repeat it, because those who do not learn from our past are bound to repeat those bad things again. So we should learn from our past, right, and move on, and not forget the historical issues that are going on there, and understand that the founders were all flawed people. All of our presidents are all flawed people. I'm a flawed person. We make mistakes. Can we learn from them and move on and become better human beings? And I think that if we all try to do that, we'll be much better off in the future. Joe.
Well, let's look at private versus public. I mean, we've been talking about the public experience, and let's look at the private. And in Orange County, it was just recently announced that what they're going to do is they're going to change Splash Mountain, from the Song of the South motif to the Princess and the Frog. And I got to tell you, from a personal standpoint, I test rode that ride 31 years ago, and there was Brer Rabbit, and there was the Tar Baby, and it was just an amazing ride at that time. It made such a big deal. And then Disney, has said that this is not a knee-jerk reaction, that 5 years ago they had been talking about removing this motif for the longest of time because it's culturally insensitive. I mean, they removed the Tar Baby. I remember it was big news when they removed the Tar Baby because that was blatantly offensive, and that was in the ride, but they kept the rest of the ride intact. So it's interesting that a couple of petitions came back recently to have the whole thing changed, and now Disney's going to remove it. Now, Disney's done this to every ride, right, Todd? They've made changes to different rides over the years, and this one is no different. But I just think it's not getting the controversy. It's like everyone. I think Disney's done it right. They and they're going to be profitable, and they're going to attract more people to the park because that's a movie that my kids saw as opposed to a movie no one has seen. So it's just like I said, statues come and go, right? Rides will come and go at Disneyland. They tore out a big section to do Star Tours. That offended people that liked Disneyland before that, and now can't relate to Star Tours. And like, why they do that to Disneyland? Why are they wrecking Disneyland? Well, it's the profit margin, and it's. I'm glad that Disney decided to do it on their own. Mm-hmm. Well, not really on their own, but without wasting a lot of time. And they're going to do it here and in Florida. And do you know if they're going to do it in Tokyo, Todd?
I don't know. Tokyo, from what I understand, and I learned some new stuff, that Tokyo is a private, not owned necessarily by Disney, and they could do whatever the heck they want to do.
So the Brer Rabbit is still going to be intact in Japan unless they make that decision. So I just find it interesting that private versus public. It's interesting how each is handled and how one is a little less ugly. But I've seen the public get involved in the private side to make things happen, and it changes things too. So
I have one question for you, Joe, and not to bring more controversy into this. All right, one more question, Joe. Colin Kaepernick.
Oh, right on.
Yeah, Colin Kaepernick says that we should not be celebrating.
He finally is getting a job. That's all I gotta say. He's one less unemployed person. Go ahead.
He just stated that we shouldn't be celebrating the 4th of July because it's a racist holiday.
It's a tough one.
So.
I like the guy's original stance on police brutality, but I think when you get that much attention, it makes you make more of yourself than is. I don't know. I wouldn't say that. I think our holiday is a little bit more broad based than it's racist. So I mean, the country has a history of being racist. So I see his point, but I guess it's appropriate for someone like him to say it. It's just something that it doesn't bubble up inside of me, but that's because I have white privilege, right?
So, here we go. That's that might be for another show.
I will say that for another show. So thank you for that good question, Bob.
No problem, Joe. Hey, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. And, also don't forget, please, everybody, go to your podcast player. It's always hard for me to say that. And download the show, friend the show, like it, do whatever you got to do. You can join us on YouTube. You can join us on Facebook. You can join us on Twitter. Where else are we, Joe? Out there doing the social media stuff. And and also please join us next week here at the OC Politics Show.
Yahoo!